Lovely day here in the mountains, and today we have Graham here, and Graham's going to talk to us about about the thoughts we have, and they may come good, but how to keep them good. A very interesting topic. Thanks, Graham.
Well, welcome. Yes, it's a beautiful morning in the mountains. Beautiful morning in the mountains. And you might have guessed that we've had a few technical problems this morning, but our cameraman's powerful and good thoughts have prevailed. The topic actually came about in a really interesting way. Sally asked me a couple of weeks ago to do a morning session. And I said, well, give me a topic. And she didn't give me a topic. So I went away and thought about it, and nothing came. And this is the magical thing that sometimes happens in our mind, in our experience. I went back to her, and she said, well, why don't you ask your daughter, Elka? It just came into her mind. And I'm used to this little dynamic with Sally. And I asked my daughter for a topic, and nothing came. And I left it for a day, and still nothing came. And about a day after I'd sort of thought, well, I just give up, someone said something to me, and it prompted me going back through my recollections of my experiences with my daughter. And I remember we were driving back from Sydney one Saturday afternoon. I picked her up from my sister's place to come home to the mountains, and we were talking about Harry Potter, of which she's read all the books maybe multiple times. And she suddenly said, "Dad, I've been thinking about God." And that caught my attention because I don't talk about God with Elka. I have a very strong experience with God, but it's not something that I talk about with her unless prompted. And I said, "Oh, yeah, well, what does God look like?" And she said, "God has a human body with a cat's head and bright orange eyes." And I thought, okay. And I said, well, if God exists, what would God do now in this world as it is now? And she said to me, without any thought, she said, he would put good thoughts in people's heads. And then she said that it would be up to them to keep them there. And that's the beautiful way that this topic came about. So how do I put good thoughts in my mind and keep them there? And over the last couple of weeks, I've just been thinking about this on and off. And I know when I started out on my journey with the Brahma Kumaris in the 80s, I had this fundamental belief or underpinning in my mind, and that was, if I can't understand all of this, well, I do resonate and I do understand some things, and I'll start with that. It's like any other education, any other study that we undertake, because you have to start somewhere and master part of it, and then in the process of doing that, you start to understand everything else. So there were things that just didn't make sense at all to me, did not click at all, but a couple of things did. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to start with the very first thing that resonated with me. And this is I'm going to take you into a meditation while I stand here. And the first thing that I resonated with was, and I heard this in a class a couple days ago, is that in this world, humans have got it backwards. We think we're a body and that we have a soul. And the statement was, well, maybe it's the other way around. Maybe I'm a soul and I have a body. And when I facilitate, and here I have an opportunity sometimes on weekends to facilitate meditation courses, I ask this question at the beginning. And the question is, if you were going to introduce yourself to someone, uh, how would you introduce yourself if you didn't talk about your name, your age, your occupation, your gender, your spiritual, religious, or spiritual beliefs, your culture? None of that. How would you introduce yourself? And the response is always similar, is, well, what have we got to talk about? And people get together and they talk and they share. And then I introduce myself. And I'm going to introduce myself to you now. This is me in real life, at work. But that's not who I am. It's part of who I am. So my introduction to you goes something like this. And whilst you're watching and you're listening, and either you're sitting or standing, whatever you're doing, we're going to move into a slightly different state of mind than what we normally carry around with us, or what we experience, and that is this. I am not this body. I've existed long before this body, and I'll exist long after this body. I came into it when the body was very small, and when I leave, it'll be much larger and older. It's almost like when I was a young baby, I stepped into a new vehicle. And it's taken me time to become familiar with it. So familiar that now I talk, I move, I act, I interact without much thinking about how to make this move. And one day I will step out of it. I'm an eternal being. I'm a being of light, a being of feeling, of energy. And I express myself through this. And I have no real understanding of how to make it work. But I've been in it for so long now, it just does what I like it to do. And I sit just here behind my eyes. And often I feel like I'm this concentrated feeling or thought sitting behind my eyes. And when I interact with someone, I speak to someone, I'm aware that I'm speaking to someone else who's in another vehicle, another body. They're just like me. They're a tiny, eternal point of consciousness. And this is not all that they are. Just like this is not all that I am. And when I'm talking to you, wherever you are in the world, you're looking at a screen, a computer or a phone or a tablet or whatever, I'm connected with you. You wouldn't be listening to me unless we had some sort of eternal connection. And so that thought takes this moment into a much broader perspective, as if this is a play. And so this is the sort of introduction that I give when I facilitate. And it's a beautiful consciousness that I try to carry around with me. So let's see if we can stay in that consciousness while we're together for however long we're together. So to go back to the topic, which is how to put good thoughts into my mind and keep them there. I heard maybe a year ago a beautiful line in a class that we have every morning in a center like this, and all centers around the world hear the same class every day, and they change every day. And this line was, go into your own household to understand your own intellect, your awareness, settle your accounts, and become powerful. And it really got me thinking, because so often we want to run away from our situation and our life, if it's difficult, it's problematic. But really the household of the self, my life, is such fertile ground to learn and to grow on a spiritual level. If you're watching this or listening to this, it's probably because you have a spiritual interest. You want to change yourself, you want to better yourself in some way. So I thought I'd tackle this topic from that perspective, is how do we use what's right in front of us to get the most beautiful experiences? Because I was thinking that the mind is really, or our awareness is like a bucket. And you would have heard this metaphor so many times. A bucket poked full of holes is a leaky bucket. The mind, the awareness, is leaky. It leaks everywhere sometimes. And it doesn't matter how much we fill it up, it's still leaking. So I wanted to tackle this from two different angles. One is plugging the holes, and the other is how to fill it up. How do I fill up my awareness? And I started thinking about it from the angle of plugging all the holes. And I thought, well, we've probably all heard so much about plugging the holes. And when it comes down to it, for me, the holes are really described by five things, five experiences that all human beings have. And that's, and there's different ways you can describe this, but this is the way I'm going to describe it, is one of the biggest holes is greed. Greed is a hole in the mind where we just leak all of our energy, our feelings, our emotions, our energy. Greed. Anger is another one. Attachment. And for me, these are the most three obvious: greed, anger, and attachment. And then it gets a little bit more subtle. Ego. Either I'm better than someone or I'm less than someone. and then there's lust. And lust takes many forms, and really the definition of lust is where I lose myself. I lose control, and I am now in control of something outside of myself. I'm lost. Greed, anger, ego, attachment, lust, where I lose myself. And I know when I'm moving around, I've kind of kept those things in my awareness to see, am I feeling one of these things? Am I acting based on one of these five things? And if I am, it's pretty obvious that I'm leaking. I'm losing energy. And not only that, I'm always, if I'm doing one of those things, strengthening those aspects of myself, and I'm creating some negative energy, negative account with someone else. So those are the things that I'm aware of, but I didn't want to tackle this on the basis of just trying to continually plug holes. I want to get beyond that. And that was really obvious to me from the beginning of my journey with all of this. So then I thought, well, how do I fill up? How do I make this easy? How do I make this an enjoyable process? And about maybe 2 years ago, I really started to think, how many lifetimes have I struggled and worked so diligently and so hard to better myself and not really gotten where I want to go? And as a result of that, I've stumbled, I've fallen, and I've created more accounts and more negativity and more bad energy with others. And my own view of myself is diminished lower and lower and lower till it really can't get any lower than that. And how do I reverse this experience? How do I fill up again? Rather than just focusing on the bad, how do I generate the good, the powerful, the beautiful, the sublime, the beautiful experiences that we want to have that never go away? And about when I was in my mid to late 20s, someone who I was living with said to me, Graham, it's really good to dive deep, but you need to come up for air. And and she was right. Is often we get really heavy and really weighed down by our spiritual endeavors, and that's not what we want to do. It's not where we want to go. It's not who we want to be. And I was in Sydney a couple of weeks ago, and we have a centre in Five Dock, just out of the CBD, and I was helping install something. You might have guessed from the picture I had something to do with construction. I was putting a desk in. And I was speaking to Charlie. Charlie's done a few of these presentations, and we were just chatting. And I said, off the cuff, I just said, "Do you think we try too hard sometimes?" And he said, "Yeah, we do. We do try too hard." And we talked a bit, and then he said to me, just off the cuff again, he said, "And what do you know? That the outcome of spirituality is just to be happy." So I wanted to tackle filling up the bucket from this perspective. So right from the start, I started looking for the reality of what was presented to me, and I accepted as almost an intellectual appreciation of spirituality. And I know all those years ago, some 30 odd years ago, it was almost like recycling the intellectual thought over and over and over again. And it was really, at that time for me, almost like chanting a mantra just to keep myself at bay, to keep the negativity that I saw in myself away. But you can only survive on that for so long. It's not very nutritious food. It's not very enabling. Um, and someone said to me about 2 years ago, we were standing in his garden up here in the mountains. I was working for him. And he's a BK, and I've known him for many years. And he said to me, Graham, we go through life, and we know how to get through life. we, we, even despite being old souls, I feel that I've had many lifetimes that I am an old soul. I've been on this planet through many lives, and I know how to get through life. But what he said to me was, it's not the easiest way to get through life. It's not the best way to get through life. It's not always enjoyable or happy. And he said, sometimes we're going through life and we have a thought or a feeling that's alien. It's not a thought that we're used to having or a feeling that we're used to having about in the context of what we're going through. It comes to mind, but we discount it, we put it aside, and then we just keep going. I know how to get through life. This is how I do things. And I will get through whatever this thing is in front of me. But it's not the easiest way. And he posed to me, and it wasn't actually, he wasn't giving me advice. He was just talking, and he said, but what if we actually took the time to stop and catch that thought or catch that feeling and actually put it in place of the way we normally do things? And it really struck a chord with me. And it was an idea that just would not go away. And I started to think, well, this is an interesting way to move from just an intellectual understanding of spirituality, the reality that I'm actually a spiritual being, to bring it into a more sustainable experience. And around about maybe a little bit after that, there was a class in the morning again. And in this class, there was a line, and it hit me like a laser beam. And the line was, when you're alone, don't try and remember me as the point form. The actual line was in the context of our relationship with the Supreme Being, God, Allah, whatever you want to call that being, that all human beings remember in some way or another. So the line went like this: when you're alone, don't try and remember me as the point form, because God is a infinitely small point of light energy, living energy, just like me. The soul, just like me, it plays a very different role to me. Don't just try and remember me that way. And then it's too hard. And the next line blew me away. It was, so in that moment, remember all your most beautiful experiences. And then you'll remember me. Then you'll remember the relationship. Then you'll remember the feeling. And not long after, I read a very old class. And in this class, it said, practice catching me. It was very short, very simple. Practice catching me. I thought, how do I catch you? God, Supreme Soul, whatever you want, whatever you're called by whoever it is who has that relationship with you. How do I be that subtle to catch you? And will it only just be when I'm sitting in meditation? Or will it be at other times during the day, during my real life? Because that's what I want to experience. I want to experience the reality of myself as a spiritual being, others, and I want to experience that very real, tangible experience of the Supreme Soul. That's what I have a very deep desire to experience. Practice catching me. So, the knowledge that we learn, spiritual knowledge, that I'm this eternal being in a physical body, that others are eternal beings in physical bodies, that we move through time, we move through lifetimes, we have energetic relationships with each other, which you could call karma, be it good or bad. That time is has a very vast perspective of all of us living lifetimes and moving in and out of lives and interacting with each other. and often not recognizing each other because we get caught up in bodies, we forget we're souls. All of these ideas, they're just theories, but then what does it look like when it comes into reality? That's what I want to experience. Because if I experience it, it becomes easy. That's the trick. So around about that time as well, I read a book. And in this book, the author, Australian author, she proposed this idea that if I based my decisions in life on feeling rather than intellectual decision making, how would that change my life? And so she said she went through a process of saying, isolating what are three key feelings you want to feel all the time in your life, and if you consistently made your decisions based on those three feelings, what would you do differently? And it really hit me, and it resonated with what this person said to me in the garden about. Often we have thoughts and feelings, but we deny them, we put them aside. And so one morning I woke up and it was very early in the morning. It was about 3:30, and I got a cup of tea and I walked upstairs. And at the top of my stairs, there's a landing, and there's my bedroom, my daughter's bedroom, and a bathroom. And I walked upstairs, and there's a chair where I normally sit for meditation very early in the morning. And I looked at this chair, and I thought, I don't want to sit there. It wasn't more than a thought, it was a feeling. It was a very tangible feeling. And I went like this to go to my, to sit down. And I thought, I just don't want to sit here. Which is really quite funny because there are 7.5 billion human beings on the planet. And I was arguing with myself at 3:30 in the morning as to whether I was going to sit in this chair or not. And I thought, Graham, how long are you going to deny that you actually have very subtle thoughts and very subtle feelings that you don't always recognize and do anything with? And it's not that they're wrong, it's just not the way you normally do it. I have a track record of doing things in this way, so I'm not going to deviate from that. Well, I thought, well, I don't want to sit there. And I want to honor this idea that I have these other thoughts and feelings. I thought, well, where do you want to sit? And I could see through my bedroom door, there was a chair sitting next to my bed. And it was dim. There was light filtering through the door. And I thought, I'd like to sit in that chair. That's what it felt like. This isn't right. I want to sit there. And I thought, well, okay. But the problem was my daughter was sleeping in my room in a separate bed. She has had an anxiety, very deep anxiety disorder, and she wouldn't sleep in her room. She'd been sleeping in my room for 6 months. I thought, well, I can't sit there because she's there. And I thought, but you don't want to sit here. Well, okay, I'll sit there. And I went and sat there. And I sat for maybe 40 minutes, and there were no light shows. I didn't leave my body. I didn't go anywhere, but it was a nice experience. And then it ended. And the very last moment, literally, of that meditation, my daughter woke up, and she sat straight up in bed. She didn't just wake up slowly. She sat bolt upright. And she looked at me and she said, Dad, what are you doing? And I turned to her and I said, oh, I've just been sitting here. I've had meditation. And she went, okay, because she knows me. It's nothing new. And then she said, I've got to go to the bathroom. So she went to the bathroom and she came back. But sorry, while she was away, I looked out of the windows above my bed. And what I could see was this incredible panorama to the east. I had two narrow windows over my bed. And it was actually the sun coming up. It was sunrise. And I looked out of the window, and what I saw was this. And this is actually the moon, and it's Mars next to it. The moon and Mars. Early January 2018, 19, sorry. And my daughter came back in and I said, her name is Elka, and I said, look at this. Come and look at this. And she went, oh, wow. Oh, I need to get a photo of that. And she got her iPad and came back, and she went to take the shot, and it was obscured by the fly screen. And she's, oh, I can't take a good shot. And I said, well, come over here to the other window. There's no fly screen. And then she said, oh, well, it's no good now because this tree is obscuring the moon and Mars. And then I said, well, let's get out on the roof. Let's climb out on the roof. And she said, I can't do that. And I said, I can, because I'm a carpenter and I'm on roofs all day. So I climbed out and I pulled her out with me. And we sat watching this unfold in front of us, sitting on the roof at 5 o'clock in the morning. And we sat there, and then she leaned over to me and she said, at one point, she said, Dad, what do you do in the morning before I get up? And I said, well, I get up and I meditate and I read a class and I write and I read and I think of it. And then she leaned to me and she said, well, I like to write as well because it helps me understand my thoughts and expand on them. And I'd never said anything like that to her. And then we sat there for a few more minutes, and she then leaned me even closer up against me and she said, you know, Dad, meditation's not an act. It's not something you do. It's a state of mind. It's an awareness. And I'd never said anything like that to her. And when I look back on that moment, what I realized I was experiencing was catching that feeling, catching that aspect of myself that I so strongly desire to feel and experience, and the kinds of relationships that I would like to experience, and the subtlety of them. And unless I catch it and make the effort to actually play with it and try it, I will never experience anything. And none of what we learn, whatever spiritual path we're on, ever will come to life unless we make that effort. And it was, in looking back, such a pleasurable, easy kind of effort to make. Um, and in that moment, I was seeing the reality of this other soul. And she was in an 11-year-old body, but quite clearly to me, what I was seeing was something much more eternal than just what you would limit as a 11-year-old girl at this point in her life. It was the reality of a depth of and recognition of an eternal being who was talking to me in that moment. I had never said those things to her. It was coming from within, from the soul. And it was an interesting, even more interesting in a much broader context. And now I'm starting to see the reality of we exist in a huge drama in which we interact with so many other souls. And in this case, it was the soul is now my daughter in this lifetime. But now I'm starting to see the emergence, the manifestation of this soul and what this soul has experienced. And there have been many other experiences that further more powerful, similar to that, more powerful and more obvious. And so I filed this one away as one of my most beautiful moments. And one of the hardest things to do when we're leaking is we see the whole. I'm being greedy, I'm being angry, I'm being egotistical, either I'm less than someone, I'm better than someone, and I act accordingly, or I'm attached to someone and all that brings with it, or I'm lost in something, and I simply don't have the power to pick up the tool, the glue, the adhesive, the sealant to plug up the hole. But when I remember these beautiful experiences that I made the effort to come to experience, that's where the power comes from, to hold those spiritual weapons, learning that I have to actually get through this situation, and not only plug the hole, but eventually get rid of it, not to make it bigger, but make it smaller. And around about this time, I I started to think of this metaphor about the Titanic, where I think there was something like 3,000 people died on one evening in the North Atlantic. And it came to mind that if the person on the helm, it would have been a huge wheel, had dropped his left hand 1 millimeter, 100 kilometers from the iceberg, they would never have hit the iceberg. They would have veered. They would have, from that moment, he slightly deviated, he or she, the ship would have started turning slowly, slowly, slowly. And it takes time. But they wouldn't have hit it and they wouldn't have sunk. And I thought, well, how small a change do I have to make to not hit the iceberg? And there was a line in a class a few days ago and it struck me. It was a very simple thought. It was when a problem comes, show your authority, but in the form of your own self-sovereignty, your own self-mastery. So when a problem comes, show your authority, not arrogantly, egotistically, but in the form of your own self-mastery. So, and I remembered this metaphor of the Titanic. How small a deviation do I have to make to fundamentally change my destiny? How small? And I was sitting at home one morning, Saturday morning. I had one thing to do on Saturday that I had to do, nothing else. And that was to do my laundry. My daughter wasn't at home. My mother wasn't at home. I live with my mother and I care for her. She's in her 80s. They weren't there. From the moment I woke up to the moment that I was sitting there at 11 o'clock in the morning with a glass of iced tea, I was plagued. There was a shadow. There was a cloud on my mind in terms of my thoughts and my feelings. I was a bit down. And I sat there and I remembered how small a deviation do I have to make to change my life. And I thought, well, what if I don't put the glass here? What if I put it there? Is that small enough? And my intellectual self, the way I normally get through life, said, Graham, you're wasting your time. Go and do your laundry. And I thought, no. I've set out on this path of this experimentation and I'm going to follow it through. How small does it have to be? I thought, well, I will put the glass there, not here. And I slowly moved the glass and I put it down very slowly, theatrically, for my own effect. There was no one watching me. And through the glass, which was empty, I saw a box sitting there. And the box was a string shopping bag. You know, you go to the groceries and you take it with you. And it was still in its box. My mother had given it to me a couple months ago. I'd never opened it. It had moved everywhere on the table for 2 months. And here it was. And on the bottom it said, easy, sustainable, natural. Easy, sustainable, natural. And many years ago, when I went to the headquarters of the Brahma Kumaris in India, Madhuban, someone had said to me, always consider that I'm an elevated, easy yogi. And I started remembering that and thinking about that. And in about 2 minutes, that cloud that had been with me from the morning dissipated. It was like a weight was lifted off my shoulders. And I went and did my laundry and my mother came home and my daughter. And I thought, I know how my interaction would have been with them if hadn't changed the way I was feeling and thinking. And I was irritable, and I would have been irritable with my mother and my daughter. I probably, at that point, it was a very difficult moment in life. And I knew that I would have slipped over the edge of maybe getting a little bit angry, not just irritable, but angry with my daughter as well. And I thought, well, because I didn't put the glass there and I put it there, it's changed my destiny now. And it was a simple moment. I was alone, but there was a demonstration to myself of my own self mastery, and then the fruit that comes from that. Um, and so I've had many other experiences like this. And what I've found is that by playing with one thing, forget about everything else that we don't understand, but one thing that resonates with me, start there and learn from that, and then see what happens and go from there. And to put this in a very long perspective, um, about a year and a half ago, there was a sister who came here, and she was from Melbourne. I'd never met her before. And she she was here. Sally, actually, who's responsible for the center, said, "Come and sit up here and come and say hello." And she sat there and she didn't say a word. It was one of the most beautiful introductions I've ever experienced. And she just very slowly looked around the room, and then she came back around and then looked at me. And it was like an energy building. It was like a laser beam when she looked at me. And it was significant. There was such a strong feeling there. And she, anyway, we left this room. It was in this room. And I went to the dining hall, and I was sitting by myself. And she came right up to me, and she said to me, "I don't know who you are. I've never met you before, but I'm compelled to tell you something." And she said, "Don't think you failed. You got exactly what you needed at the beginning of life." And the most amazing thing about this was I had crystallized that idea in my mind only the night before, and I needed someone to say it to me in words for it to become fully manifest in my mind. And when I look back on my life and what I know from a spiritual perspective, things I know, I've carried them through life, and I've always used them and played with them and experimented with them. And I thought, what if I didn't know these things at the beginning of my life? How would my life have been? How many icebergs would I have hit? And I thought, my life would be so different. It would not be as good as it is, and I would not have traversed the things I have in my life without what I know. So, what I want to leave with today is that what is it that we're filling the bucket up with? Is it just thoughts? Is it lots of feelings? Are we just continually going round and round and round on an intellectual level? What is it that we're actually filling this bucket with? And if I could use one word, it would be happiness. And you would hear that so many times in a presentation like this. But there was one last line I'll leave you with that I heard in the class, is that when you have the experience of your own self-sovereignty, then there is the experience of happiness. When there is the experience of my own self-sovereignty, then there is the experience of happiness. So I invite you to dive into your own household, understand your own awareness, settle your accounts, and become powerful, become strong. So we'll finish off this morning with a brief meditation, which I'm going to speak. And wherever you are, I'd like you to imagine that although you're in the location you are in, that together we're in a room. We're in a room of subtle thought, that relationships have nothing to do with proximity, how close we are to each other physically, but they have everything to do with how close we are and how clean we are in our relationships. And we have relationships with thought. Thought drives everything. So we are in a room together right now in this moment, and we are connected with feeling. And I'd like you to imagine that you are actually sitting with your kindred spirits, the ones that are listening to this and watching this today. And I am here with you as well. And let's take ourselves to a much broader perspective on our own individual existence. So as you sit there and I stand here, I am not this body. I am an eternal being. My body is very small and now is large. And I am the being who makes this costume move. You are the being that makes the costume you're in move. This is my most valuable possession. It is in this lifetime that I can learn to be my very best. That almost perfect form of myself, my pure self, it's calling out to me. And as I stand here, or as I sit, I feel this body, either my feet pressing into the floor, the weight of my body in the chair. I'm aware through my eyes, my ears, my touch, but I'm the observer of these sensations. I'm separate to them. They're not the sum of who I am. And I step back, and I feel I'm sitting just behind my eyes. And my feelings and thoughts become more concentrated behind my eyes. I'm not in my feet, my hands, my elbow. I am light, energy. I feel. And that energy moves out and around me. And I imagine that I'm with all of you, and that feeling grows. We can connect with our energy. And I imagine that because I've stepped away from this costume in my mind, that I've moved into a more subtle region of thought, not a physical region of experience, but subtle. And I imagine myself lifting out of my body. I do this with my mind. I'm still here, but I imagine I'm lifting out. And I move away from myself. I see my own form, my image standing here, and it's talking. There are some others in the room as well, and I see them below in this room. And I lift up. I go through the roof, and I'm looking down on this building, and I rise up into the air. And I see myself there. It's as if there's a canopy of light around my form, my body, and the others in the room. And I take my attention away from this immediate room, and I can see all of you. I can feel you. I see points of light starting to sparkle, and a canopy of light around each of you. And I see the reality of how those thoughts and feelings of all of you reach out and connect and influence. I can feel that. I can see it in my mind. And I sit here, I enjoy this experience. I'm no longer trapped in this moment. And this feeling is a feeling I can create again and again. And when I'm heading to that next iceberg, that next problem, I can use this experience to step away, to make that 1 millimeter turn. I don't have to miss the iceberg by much, just a little. And when I experience myself doing that, then there is happiness.
Thank you, Graham. It was very beautiful. And we'll remember that a lot. It's not just a fleeting thing, but something very deep that Graham was speaking about and feeling in his heart. So thank you very much.
Thank
Keep
you.
up those beautiful moments.
Yeah.
So thank you, everyone, and have a beautiful day. We'll see you tomorrow.